Dear all, I think it is time for us to start. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, very welcome to this open session where we're having panel discussions today. I'm not going to introduce them. There will be more information about that. Today is inevitably the consequence of yesterday, and tomorrow will be the consequence of now. So during this High Council, we are very much looking at the actions that we need to be doing now to build the best possible future for Latvia. And we are going to explore that in these two panels as well as we move along. So very welcome from my part, Julia Sundberg, Chairman of the Board. And let's have some lively and constructive discussions. Welcome.
Thank you, Julia. Thanks, everybody, for coming. I will switch now to Latvian. So the working language of this event will be Latvian. Everybody who needs some translation, please use devices you have, or you can get there in the corner. And the channel 3 is the keyword to understand everything what I will say in Latvian. Is everybody okay with that now? Check the sound. Okay. If any problems, so please ask girls there to help. Tātad.
So then, once again, a warm welcome to the public panel discussion. I'm very happy to welcome you all to this discussion on behalf of the Foreign Investors Council in Latvia, in a panel discussion leading up to the high-level meeting with the Latvian government. And the motto of this discussion is tomorrow is the consequence of now. We'll work until 3 o'clock, so, until 5 o'clock. First session will last until 3 o'clock, and we'll start with Starting a Smart Nation. We'll talk about a well-educated workforce, workforce constraints or labor constraints, and the skills of the labor force and how we try to respond from the labor market perspective to various changes and how we satisfy the business needs and how to make sure that the Latvia is not losing competitiveness-wise as a result of the lack of the appropriate workforce. You can follow us on Facebook, you can follow us online and through Leta, National News Agency webpage. So together with various experts, we'll try to find the answers to the questions that I not just posed. And let me introduce to you the 4 panelists of the first panel discussion. As first, I would like to introduce to you Eric Edlīds, who has a long experience in the private sector, and now he is acting as the State Secretary in the Ministry of Economics. He is busy at the moment. He said that he has to apologize because he will be leaving sooner, but he will most probably leave us sooner because he will have to address some labor market issues, which means that he will be working on the issues that we are working currently on. Vyacheslav Kasheevs, Associate Professor of University of Latvia, is another of our panelists. The quantum physics researcher who has been awarded by the World Physics Forum as well. From him, we will try to find out what we need to do in order to make sure that we have more excellent minds or more talent coming out of our education system for the benefit of labor market as well. I'm very happy to welcome Arvel Sašarā, the chairperson of the Saeima Education, Culture and Science Committee, who served as the Minister for Economics for the past 3 years. So what do politicians think about all these issues is what we're going to ask Mr. Sašarā then. So what can politicians do and how policies should be shaped in order to ensure a more efficient labor market and education sector cooperation or link up? Mr. Edlīds, yes, we already introduced you, so please take your seat. So, and last but not least, we couldn't do without the business sector representatives either, and this is where everything starts and this is where everything ends. So what do businesses want or would have to do in order to make sure they have the appropriate labor force? Zlata Elšīņa-Zdašarīnska, chairperson of the FICIL board, PricewaterhouseCoopers representative, is our last panelist. My name is Tāls Eipurs. My base job is at the Radio Latvia and LD television channel, but I will be your today's moderator, and we expect you to be also very active and engaged not only our viewers will be able to send in their questions, but you will also be able to contribute with your views, remarks and questions when we will open the floor for Q&A. If you think that you absolutely disagree with what is being said by the panelists, raise your hand, interrupt them at any time. You'll be given a mic and you'll be able to intervene and interject whenever you feel so. Foreign Investors Council in Latvia has already presented its vision. Some of you might know about the opinion of the FICIL. I know that Mr. Asherad is aware of what FICIL thinks about what is happening currently and what sort of change is expected. So modern and well-educated workforce and its availability is the first issue that I would like you to discuss. Let us start with sort of a general sort of health check. What do you feel? What is happening and what sort of change we need? And we should start probably with the opinion of the business representatives. Do we have enough well-educated workforce? Is it available? So, Zlata, please, I would like to ask you to respond first. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I think that we as business operators and business directors, as well as FICIL in general, have been raising the workforce constraint problem or issue for a number of years. Previously, it was all about the lack of workforce in sort of basic professions, whereas now we are facing labor constraints across the board or across the field. So we need to put in place short-term solutions. We have to address short-term needs when it comes to workforce. But on top of that, we should also look at the sustainability of workforce, sufficiency of workforce in the long run, how to retain people, youngsters here in Latvia, how to make sure they have jobs, job opportunities here, and how to make sure that they contribute to the Latvian economy the best way that they can using their talent. So previously, we were not so much focused on accessibility or availability, but rather not availability or the constraints, whereas now availability has become a sore problem. So scarcity of human resources, has it had a detrimental effect on the economy, or is the consequence still yet to be felt? Well, this is about lost opportunity, really. If you have the workforce, economy is growing faster and healthier, whereas now we can see that the economic growth is slowing down due to the human resource constraints. And Martin Kazaks already showed that quite abundantly what workforce constraints means currently, the way it affects negatively the economy. And from the business perspective, what do we need to do now? What are the instant sorts of fixes that we need to put in place in order to reduce the impact of the workforce constraints, not from a long-term perspective, but from a short-term perspective? Well, first of all, it's important to have, bold decisions on the government side. So government should boldly address the issue of migrant workers. So we should bring in migrant workers or solve it. That would be a sort of a quick fix to our current problem. Develop clear criteria and various administrative procedures for speeding up the inflow of the migrant workers. As regards to the long-term strategies, well, it requires an integrated solution across sectors, education, and we need to also define our smart nation policy and be clear about how many people we need in different sectors and professions. And we should get rid of our fear of migrant workers. Migrant workers is not bad because they will help us grow, and depending on their expertise, if you will, they will be able to contribute, bring in new experiences, innovation, probably new approaches to our country, something that we are probably missing in some of the areas. That's my view. What about the Ministry of Economy? Do you share the sentiments of the businesses? Well, in a nutshell, yes. I would, to a large extent, agree with what the businesses think. Because if you take the labor market, as we heard yesterday from the OECD, as regards to the labour market context in Latvia. They mentioned that it's quite tight. I don't know how to translate it in Latvian, but it's indeed, a very sort of tight spot that we're in at the moment. On one hand, we see that the unemployment is still sort of bit too high. On the other hand, when it comes to long-term unemployment, there are 90,000 people who are outside the labour market and are not employed. So this is an urgent problem that we should address. And on top of those 90,000 people outside the labour market, we also have 11,000 people who are receiving, who have humanitarian and social program degrees who are unemployed for some time. So that is the sort of the answer to the accessibility or labour force availability question. On the other hand, we also are facing huge demand for people with STEM degrees. So some 17,000 vacancies or jobs are currently available when it comes to STEM professions, which includes construction, metalworking, or steel industry vacancies and other related or affiliated areas. Then we have some 30,000 jobs that are vacant currently. So we are aware, we have identified the problem, we have identified the scope, and we are also aware that we need to find short-term fixes as well as long-term solutions. And we should sort of delve in and see what causes these trends and what we can do in medium run, and we have to cooperate with other partners on long-term solutions as well. Well, I suppose that we have, knowledgeable people in the audience, and they are expecting from you particular examples as regards to what sort of action you have taken and what Ministry of Economy is going to do to fix short-term challenges. As you described, we're in a tight spot at the moment. So what are you going to do? Well, instantly what we are going to do, well, we're actually continuing what the previous government started, and Mr. Ašarādis was responsible for that. We are continuing a trilateral cooperation between the Ministry of Welfare, Ministry of Education and Science, and Ministry of Economy. There's a trilateral sort of cooperation at the level of ministers who are working together on a program, on a joint program, which consists of various activities, and we are now trying to prioritize those activities from a short-term, medium-term and long-term perspective in order to have this long-term roadmap, if you will. Going back to short-term instant response, would like to also underline that Ministry of the Interior has prepared a legislative proposal amending the immigration law. Of course, this is up to debate still, but this has to be thoroughly debated. But what we are expecting from these amendments is that, we have to put in place legal framework which does not create additional obstacles to bringing in the workforce in order to solve the problem with 90 plus 11,000 people, that we, not to damage those people, and their employment opportunities. If we just open the doors to seasonal workers and it would just bring in migrant workers, that will create additional risks and additional pressure on those unemployed who are currently, long-term unemployed outside the system.
Why couldn't this happen sooner? Any obstacles to this? Well, the discussion is not a simple one, because we have partners throughout the economy, all sectors, and they have different needs and different interests. And the total movement, the drive of Latvia is the following: we are not a large country, and we will never be able to build our economy on the basis of huge masses of foreign labor force. We have to find an economic model that is able to add as high value added as possible per unit of workforce. So we really need to have a very sophisticated discussion regarding the sectors and the term for which we are ready to open the door. being aware that this is a short-term solution for low productivity sector, but that would be only a small step towards a higher aim, a higher goal, and we should be aware that this is only a short-term solution and only preparatory stage for some future actions. What do specialists say who work in the field and around it? But we definitely need political decisions, and this is a very sensitive story. Mr. Asheradens, we heard just guest workers mentioned. What's the opinion of this availability or unavailability of workforce? So what's your take on this? Currently, we have seen for quite some time great disproportion. We lack labor force, and the outcome of this is that the productivity rate and in general in the economy, the growth is only 3% in Latvia, wage 8 to 9% increase. So for long, of course, we cannot tolerate this situation in the long term. The economy is slowing down, which we see already, or we might have even more extensive effects. And of course, this hides not only a short-term labor unavailability, but also changes in the labor market. And Latvia has become OECD member state and a state integrated into global economy. And the nature of labor market is changing rapidly. We have not only demand for low-qualified labor, but also for very high-qualified labor force. And that's a problem. However, in short term, as regards immigration policy, we know that the political structure of the parliament is as it is, and the coalition does not see currently the possibility to open door to immigration, perhaps to highly qualified labor force. That was the decision of the previous government, that this approach would be softer, but for low qualifications that would be unacceptable. And that would be unacceptable to open immigration for low qualification labor force. That's ideology, but what's the practice? Well, in practice, I would say the following: we just lack people. That's it, on all levels. And also, I might agree to this approach that we are looking at it from the point of view of productivity, and that we offer some kind of short-term, perhaps measures. We provide some kind of exemptions to companies, but we really lack hands. We lack labor force, but also we lack brain, we lack minds. Mr. Koscheios, as regards minds and brain, what's your perspective? What the system of higher education is currently doing and what it could do? Because we heard now, we know what the problem is. Well, as a representative of academic community, I might say that we also face problems of labor force, of workforce, and this is linked to really major problem, fundamental problems that the system of higher education, from which we expect the ability to respond rapidly to ensure labor force where it is required. And here we see the dilemma. An academic person is a human resource which is most difficult to manage. It's like ideal gas. He will fill in the whole volume available to it. And that's academic freedom, academic liberty. That's fine. If we want excellent academic members of the academic community, we should see this excellent model, role model for the students, maximum capacity. But the challenge is in the interface between this academic freedom and capacity of the faculty members and the social needs of society. And actually we need really criteria for the contract, what the academic people, members of this community should do, and also the institution of higher education, which should be able to respond very rapidly to the challenges and send this very expensive resource, the lecturers, to where the need is, and also to adapt this high capacity, to adjust it, because we really want to expand research. Is this the ideal? Yes, this is the ideal we should strive before, but we also have a number of obstacles. The regime in which at least institutions who are engaged in research have worked is the survival regime, and inevitably over time makes these institutions to become the opposition, because they see threats coming from everywhere, threats for the academic liberty. But academic liberty should also bring with it academic responsibility. We are not saying that our research should have total freedom in choosing what to research and the methods, but yet the aims, the objectives that are set should somehow interconnect with the researchers' visions. And it's sometimes really quite difficult to convince the lecturers that they should teach in another way, or perhaps take a more practical look at the study programs and to provide labor force required by the labor market. Any comments? And also we will open the floor for questions as well. Well, indeed. We are talking about two different things, and if we are talking about fast solutions, that would be immigration. And the next point would be adult education, lifelong learning, which would be able to respond to market needs. It's more complicated with universities. If we look at the universities, well, I'm not going to analyze all the causes for it, but we have ended up in a situation where we really have to re-examine the situation. And we have come to this classical trap of middle income within the state, but the universities won't be able to find a solution to this within a year, because of the changes that we need are fundamental, and one among these is that we have to return, to take back science and research into universities. We are working on this in our committee as well. We still have this Soviet legacy. Because of military considerations and security considerations, science was placed outside universities. And now, for example, even in 1990s, two laws were adopted, one on science and one on universities. But in fact, all universities should have education, research, and also international excellence. So the time is ripe for it. We have to draft a new law on education and science, and we really have to agree on what the role of a university in a contemporary society is. And that would be, first of all, amassing of knowledge and creating knowledge. With the second, we are not doing so well. We know our universities do not really get into the first 1,000 places in ratings. And then also we have to teach, but then also another point, we are not doing transfer of knowledge into society. And the very last one, which we all need, universities should become also the driving forces for economic growth. I am not saying that universities should earn a lot of money, but Aalto University in Finland, it's really a driving force. And then Stanford University in Silicon Valley. If you go to Israel, I could really produce a whole list of universities. The universities are driving growth. And at this point, we really should come together and re-examine the role of universities, but we are not solving the problems next year but we just have to move, we have to transition to knowledge society. And we have very complicated discussions at the parliament, and also FICIL has been involved. We also have to speak about management model for universities, financing model, but the time is ripe for changes, and I hope that by the end of the year we will agree on changes. Mr. Eglitis. Well, perhaps these are not short-term measures, and yet, if we look at the potentials that we have in the structured unemployment, then definitely we should take into consideration also the regional division of Latvia. We see that, at least partially, we could resolve the problem by promoting regional mobility. and it's quite hard to find really very short-term solutions. However, we have started working on this. We are engaged in this, and let's see how we proceed in the discussions with the Ministry of Finance and also the Parliament. But also then we have the question of availability of housing for young specialists that we want to lure from less developed regions to those places where some economic activities are ongoing. And some municipalities have been dealing with this matter already on their own, but we are trying to use these models as a basis to produce a new proposal and offer jointly with partners and the Parliament. Thank you, Mr. Eglitz. Mr. Sauka wanted to comment on this. Mr. Sauka. Oh, thank you. Just one comment and one question. Now about knowledge and talent and smart people that all sectors need and all economies, including Latvia's, unavailability of these. Of course, I could go on about this, but I will say only the following. I believe that we are all aware that science and research in Latvia to a large extent is local. And we might hope that we might see professors like Mr. Kasche, more professors like Mr. Kaschejevs, but that's only hope. We should do more, because these are the people who create productivity, and it's not the correct approach to only look at the statistics, growth in salaries and growth in productivity, because perhaps these people had been working for low salaries already for some time, and it's not like 3 and 8%. It's not that simple. And the question that I wanted to ask you, it's not about those wise minds and smart minds. And this is not what the companies want from policymakers. The companies are demanding for many years already workforce. And people at the Ministry of Economy are well aware that this problem is linked to the cycle of economy. When we have, with the recession, this demand will decrease. So actually, they are asking from you a flexible solution, that this labor force should be available depending upon this cycle of economy. Why are we talking about it? Economy, we see that certain recession already, and after this law is amended, the labor force will not be longer needed. Actually, this is a question that should be addressed to politicians and ministers. Perhaps I will start explaining this from the perspective of legislative technique. Well, you have inertia in any system. We all know it. We all are aware of it. And the dialogue that we currently have, the way it is evolving, although we are a sufficiently small society, nevertheless, the plurality of opinions and democracy in Latvia is really valued very highly. So to get to some solution at a technical level, we are spending much more time than necessary. That's one point. Another one. If now referring to the situation that you mentioned, those levels of qualification, well, public administration is not an exception. We have the same situation. We all know this compatibility of remuneration with qualification. And when people who create a product, well, they have the capacity and the ability that they have, perhaps they are producing it at a slower rate, and perhaps that does not meet the quality that we would want to achieve. And so perhaps you sometimes have to review the document and the product, and this is making this inertia within the system even greater. That's about the technical, the technical aspects in producing legal acts. No optimism at all. What could be done today, now? Perhaps some kind of decisions are needed. Well, currently on the level of public administration, we have very hopeful discussions with the Chancellery regarding change of the models of remuneration. Let's see how it goes, whether it will be approved on the political level. That would be some kind of basis for us to attract people with higher qualification internally. And also, it's not only that we adopt some kind of decisions within public administration. We also have to test some kind of hypothesis outside, and that requires resources. If we want to use we also want to use the contribution coming from the academic community and some kind of inputs from outside. I see two sides in this. If we look at the labor market, then indeed we see huge reserves of the labor market. The ones that we see in the planning tools, this low qualified, it's approximately 1/3 of 980,000 of the workers. They are low qualified and they will be unemployed in the future. The second point, the public sector is very inefficient. We have all the stories about inefficient school network. We have to look at the Estonian public administration and the number of employees, also the number of police officers per capita. If we compare Latvia and, for example, Estonia, we could become more efficient. Then the point, re-immigration. In Poland, this situation has been solved in a rather simple way. We have this immigration. We have very complicated rules how to employ someone from Ukraine or Belarus. In Poland, it's very easy. The employer just declares that they are going to employ the person. They have 2 million in Poland, people coming and going in a quite flexible way. I would like to presume that currently neither Latvian political community nor inhabitants would be ready for this kind of turn of events, to have such completely free labor market. I agree to what Mr. Sauka is saying, that also agreements are concluded with Polish companies. They come on business trips. They are like posted workers, and they just do the work. But in Poland, they also. We have in our coalition some partners who are really against it.
Hello everyone, Simon Zitzers from the Havas Latvia company. I suppose that neither my name nor my company's name is familiar to anyone. Just wanted to underline that those who were flying through Riga airport most probably encountered a lot of baggage problems, luggage problems. I see people smiling. Havas is most probably what you have seen. Yes, I am the one to be blamed for your missing luggage, or that's me, you know. Anyway, I just wanted to also add my remarks, you know, what happened? Well, what happened was very simple. We didn't have enough people, you know, working with luggage. And that is one side of the problem. Another side of the problem is that for several years now, what we've been seeing is that youngsters especially are cheating or abusing the benefit system, or the sickness benefits in particular. They have the sickness leave and they just call up the doctor and then they are on the sickness leave, and then you see those youngsters either enjoying themselves in the outdoors cafes or working, you know, undeclared or doing undeclared job while still receiving the benefits from the government. So that's one side. And another side to the problem is that, you know, our main, you know, worker is a youngster. We are mostly employing youth, and youngsters quite openly say that, you know, I am quitting in May, I will come back in September, I will live on benefit, on dole, meanwhile I will rest throughout the summer, maybe I'll do some undeclared things and enjoy my summer. That's the way it goes. And probably one of the problems that we should start addressing instead of focusing on higher education in universities, which is undoubtedly very important and very noble, if you will, we should also talk about what is happening in kindergartens, in preschool, primary school, secondary level as well, how we teach Latvian language, Latvian literature. Are we teaching anything useful, really? What is the merit? What is the value? If you look at the education or professional standards, are we forcing them to read? Are we forcing them to think? I have teen parents and I know what is being taught. Or otherwise we will have, cheaters. Yes, cheaters. But, what is the best case scenario with good education? What are we expecting? What are the expectations? If we focus on what, children in preschool age or schooling age should know, then we'll probably have talented people who will be willing to continue acquiring higher education as well. Now, from the constraints point of view, or scarcity point of view, which has been mentioned, and I have done my estimates when it comes to Riga and Greater Riga area, the labor pool or the talent out there is probably 20 people out of all the people, irrespective of what the employment figures say, that tens of thousands of people available out there. But if you take away certain age groups, because I don't think that we are going to hire 70-year-old people to bring in the luggage. They will just die, because it's a hard physical work. Yes, we have a short remark as far as I see.
FICIL.
Izglītības vadītājs. One short remark regarding the universities. Why universities are important, why pupils are important. Because, teachers come from universities. I mean, they are being taught, or they learn in universities, and there's a nice initiative from the Ministry of Education and Science on attracting young teachers. And for me, that is the right way forward, because they graduate from the university, and then it's sort of, the quality of teachers trickles down to low levels of education system. And I fully agree with what. And I have a question to Mr. Eglis. Now we have the NDP National Development Plan is being drafted, and there are a lot of work groups and a lot of workshops. Has NDP been addressed properly through those discussions and through the draft NDP, and how are universities involved in drafting the NDP? Mr. Eglis, Mr. Asheradens, are you in a position to answer? Well, from our perspective, let me sort of start with a general remark. What the Ministry of Economy is doing, what it currently prioritizes: productivity, export promotion, investment attraction, human capital innovation, and the business environment. Here are our 6 priorities that we are currently focused on. Those are those areas where we are currently working or intensifying our efforts. And NDP is a strategic document which sort of basically expires this year, and we have started updating NDP, but frankly speaking, I don't expect any major changes when it comes to NDP strands or NDP priorities or emphases. And then we have the cross-sectoral coordination center, which is responsible for the NDP. And what is nice about drafting of the NDP is currently that the government action plan also emphasizes productivity, or summary already mentions the productivity as an overarching objective, and also the newest reincarnation of NDP is also all about productivity. So we are addressing the issue, but again, since we're a democratic country and everyone has firm beliefs about what needs to be done in different areas, finding a consensus is not that easy. And when it comes to the NDP and the discussion of the NDP is really whether we'll be able to agree on priorities, whether there's going to be a consensus on the priorities, or we will rather have a wish list of all the actions we want to fund. This debate is still open. This issue is still open. Working groups are, tackling this, but it's too early to predict what the end result is or what the outcome is going to be. Once again, productivity is written all over the NDP So, and through productivity, labor issues will be addressed as well, the quantity, the quality, and long-term strategy as well. Mr. Ashradens, I just wanted to respond to this previous remark. Universities are extremely important, I mean tertiary level, extremely important, because at the end of the day it's all about pay. Let me remind you, 30% of our workforce are working for minimum pay or below minimum pay, so labour market needs to restructure and wages need to be competitive in order to boost competitiveness of the businesses. Universities have a large role to play in this regard. As regards to the structural change, I'm happy that the ministry and I actually initiated this, and you're continuing to focus on we need a Ministry of Employment and Economics. Currently employment or labour market issues are not really the responsibility of any of the ministries. Well, Ministry of Welfare, what about it? Well, Ministry of Welfare is trying to reintegrate long-term unemployed and so on and so forth. They have active employment programs and various social programs, but we don't have really a labour sort of ministry, and I hope the Ministry of Economy would be more responsible for labour issues. Have you suggested to the Prime Minister? Yes, I have mentioned that, and hopefully the Cabinet will address that. Now, and finally, about the NDP, and I will now sort of wear my politician's hat when it comes to NDP. It basically says everything, flowers to the women, ice cream to the children, fish to the fishermen, and so on and so forth. There are a lot of bold wishes, and everyone wants something out of the NDP, and everything is promising everything in the NDP, but nothing specific really, and there's no change. I mean, it's still a wish list. And let's say, for example, Sitra, a huge development fund in Finland with 100 million euros or 50 million euros rather, and we should, select 5-6 major priorities that we focus on in coming years, and where the outcome or the result is achieved in the coming years. So I'm very skeptical about the NDP. We are sort of making the same mistakes of promising everything to everyone, and I'm very skeptical about it. Although I'm on the committee which is responsible for that, nevertheless, I see that the same vicious trend continuing. Now, as regards to the availability of labour, still a challenge, and I suppose you have a question about this. Maris Groznic, also a member of the FICIL board from Czech Latvia, would like to bring the discussion back to the workforce, to the working class issue. And this is a comment, not a question. When it comes to public debate, or public discourse, we should be talking about the available labour force, those tens of thousands, because this sort of distorts the perception. I mean, it shows that bold moves are needed in a short term. Compare it to a concrete production. If you say produce a concrete and then in your silo you have unavailable residual amounts. Those are residual amounts that are not really usable. And if we say that we want to get them back on the labour market, we will only raise a lot of misconceptions, because people will think, there is a labour pool available that can be used. But that is actually the non-available, non-usable residual amount. And if I would have 5,000 tons of residual cement in my silo, that everyone would be clear of what I'm talking about. We should mention that those people who don't want to work, those 90 plus 11,000 who don't like, and they will find ways not to be employed. And this is what we're talking about when we're talking about those 90 plus 11,000.
Is managing all commercial activities in Riga Airport and also ground handling activities as well. I would like to open different angle, and I want to learn really the rate of my question. We talk about the unemployment rate, total number of unemployees, but the main problem from us actually, when we open the positions, when we open, for example, 100 positions, how many candidate is applying to our position? What is that rate? Sector by sector, when we look, we can find another rate after that. For example, my colleague already, we were talking in the summertime, he opened 100 positions. Within 2 weeks period, he accepted 0 apply. Even I know Air Baltic rigs, they are opening big position, 1,000 people positions. You are asking how many you got. They are saying even we didn't get 150 sometimes. This is the one subject that I want to learn when we open the position. What is the capacity of Latvia as a worker sources that we are getting responses from the candidates. This is the one thing. I think second subject also we have a lack of capacity and sources from the urban size. That even we are discussing internal this subject, but that people, yes, they want to work, but how we will bring them to Riga? Accommodation problem, transportation problem. Is there any support from the government side that people we will find maybe some free quarter or housing subjects? This is the one issue also as well.
Internal migration.
Yes, internal migration. And the third subject, actually, generally, globally, when we look this subject today, what we are discussing, we should look United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These SDGs, we are saying 17 goals, 179 targets, and inside of that even we are talking about this migration subject. And every country, they have a homework, and they have some index rating, and they have to actually finish their homework well till 2030 for making sustainable our countries and also planet as well. So everybody involvement is very important. We should start from the urban size. We should look how people, what is the rate of the people willingness to work in our position. And the third one is a global one, this SDG Sustainable Development Goals subject. Just I want to say.
Thank you very much. Vice
Short comments, or just leave it at this and move on to the next topic. I will just remind, I mentioned the regional migration. The topic is known and understandable, and we have started working on this, but we have to admit that probably we won't find short-term solutions to this. We need financing for it. If we look at it and if we simplify it really extremely, in the post-Soviet years, 2% of the housing, 2% have been renovated. We are not talking even about the one which could be considered the housing, sort of affordable housing pool for low level or medium level labor force. We know that the housing has been renovated here in the downtown of the city, in the center, where 1 square meter will cost 2,500 euros. This is not what we are talking about when we talk about affordable housing. This is a rather complicated matter. Another point which I would like to refer to, now speaking about this general basis, what we put into the foundations that we put into the younger generation. This seems to be a global problem. The faster the economy develops, the higher level of welfare, the more obvious these situations become. I worked with a Korean company a couple of years ago, and that was one of the typical questions mentioned by my colleagues in Seoul, that young people in Korea by default doesn't want to work, although we see that in general the state is quite developed. And another note, we definitely should change also attitude in our society towards vocational education. We are higher education biased. We believe that we should be producing only people with university degrees, although vocational education gives really good opportunities for healthy and very good working life. I can support what was said, that we have this fundamental problem of affordable housing, not only the technical aspects that nothing has been built really, but also we have to relate this to the incomes that people have, and that this is not affordable. We know Valmiera has launched this dynamic program and they are able to rent an apartment for €5 per square meter. And this is really the top, the cream of Valmiera society, by building budget apartments. And so if we go lower into the lowest price, then it's a problem of mortgages as well. If the term is 30 years, then €5 are affordable, but we need €2 or €3, and we cannot find some kind of tool for longer financing to really afford this. I believe that Finland is building 8,000 houses per year that are subsidized. We would need in Latvia, I would say, 1,000. And we should shed the same and get to this within 2 years. We are happy that Valmiera municipality has found a way to proceed. Now, very briefly, a comment. Artūrs Kokars, Association of Aviation. One comment about the vocational education. In aviation, a pilot or a dispatcher, or these are licensed professions. These are not academically accredited programs, but the cost is 70,000 to 100,000 euros. A young person who wants to obtain this vocation with guaranteed remuneration, 35,000 per year. Well, there's no tool in the state for the person to take out a study loan. And again, we could support this whole sector by providing such a tool. And another note regarding academic education. The systems, the way those budget-funded places are allocated, they really level out the competition between study programs. And institutions of education are not interested in improving these programs, and they are not interested in internal competition. Thank you for this comment. We have to move on to the next topic, but a very brief comment. I'm continuing this whole matter about levels of education, vocational education. I am Aldis Zieds, Port Terminals Mariner Company. In our company and in other terminals, we know that we have no problems with management, with productivity, with technologies. Everything is fine. What we lack medium-level workforce, able to manage the equipment, some specialized equipment that we have at the port. And this equipment is very complicated, very expensive, up to 7 million, and with all kinds of technical tools and electronics. And this operator of the crane would be highly qualified, really, because he would be allowed to work with this equipment. But to the extent of my knowledge, these specialities for the ports are not prepared on this secondary level, like a vocational education. They are not trained. But we shouldn't invent the wheel. In many European ports, they have the so-called port schools. They have certified programs, and they train on-site, which is even more interesting, because then they have a pool of employees. And we have also, we have different, and these graduates would be available for the ports. Well, lifelong learning is very important. And now we have reserved altogether almost 70 million euros for lifelong learning. But it's not really spent properly. The Ministry of Education is trying to find ways how to cooperate with sectors, but the sectors are silent. Instead of cooperating with the Ministry of Economics, Welfare and Education to prepare academically sound lifelong learning programs, we have very poor outcomes in this. If you say that there's demand for this, let's set up a school like this. I believe the Ministry of Welfare will finance at least half of it. Perhaps not now, but during the coffee break you could discuss all this in detail. But now what Mr. Ashradan said and what was said regarding kindergartens and the importance of universities and preparing those who are training the specialists that you need. Now we turn to the story which perhaps has somehow stepped into the background, but it seems to be quite influential. What, how, and in what quality labor force is trained here in Latvia. Recently we saw at the major university of Latvia, of the elections of the rector of this institution, and it's not quite clear how the situation is going to resolve itself. The global ratings of universities were mentioned, and also the possibility to study here and to stay here after graduation. All this. And perhaps the reason and the cause of this is the way our universities are being governed and managed, also the models of financing, where and by who the decisions are taken. We know that FICIL has made several proposals how to change the system, which is not perhaps self-sufficient, and sometimes we see some stagnation within the system. So, Mr. Asheradens, I understand that the Ministry of Education and Science has even sort of promised to make some kind of proposals by amendment, what could be done. So perhaps let's step a bit back and speak about the current situation and what should be changed with respect to the governance model of universities. Oh, I could spend the whole time we have discussing this. Well, universities are independent, self-sufficient systems currently. They elect the leaders. It seems that in the majority of cases, the situation has already exhausted itself. We see that the university, I believe, is going through a deeper crisis than just electing a rector or not. But the university is very important for us, so I'm really following very closely the situation, the way it evolves. FICIL is making a very good proposal to open up the governance of university and to allow society also to become involved and to define the objectives. That could be the council and the board that would approve of the strategy and the rector, and then the rector would ensure academic independence. And the result would be, well, we should look at some models. If we look at the University of Tartu, Tartu is within the first 300 in global rankings. Aalto University, that's an excellent innovation development center, international center. But I'm talking about the governance model now. But the major principle should be that the university is dealing with its own internal matters. This principle perhaps requires some change. Perhaps that's why it's also isolated from the labor market. I'm looking at the outcomes, the results that we have, and here I have to fully agree to what was said, that the governance model should be replaced. And I come back to what I said before, the contract should be clear. We speak about our excellent graduates who have left, and we should think about ways of getting them back. But it's not clear for us what is the offer, what is offered to them. The global practice is very simple, and that's also the example of Tartu. Objectives have been set, certain resources are available, and these are like professors' positions. And then it's quite clear what is demanded from the faculty members, and the researchers and professors should be clear. But I know that also the reform of the grant system of the Latvian Science Council has been very successful. Now the rules of the game are clear to everyone, and I know how to plan my strategies, what to do, what will be demanded of me. But if we take one step further, how to set up the same program as the one that the University of Tartu has, if the dean or the rector does not have the tools available and his responsibility is different, then the rules of the game are not clear. We end up with this survival regime, protecting one's own fragmentation and a dead end in a way.
Madam Elsnī Zaščerīnska, what do you think? When you are approached by universities and when you tell them that these are the professions in which we need more workers, so what do you think should be changed in the governance model of the universities, and how does that affect the businesses? Well, let me answer from a different angle or perspective. I think that the joint objective here is to ensure that the Latvian children are studying, working here in Latvia, and are active here in Latvia when they graduate. And this is the objective that should determine what we do in order to make sure that our children are studying here and our universities are prestigious. As regards to the employability, I think the main problem with employment and for the employers at universities is the different sort of understanding of what kind of people with what kind of skills, competences we need compared to what is provided by universities, or the mismatch between the both, and whether those graduates are able to survive in our corporate environment, and whether we as businesses should probably invest more in those human resources to boost their competitiveness and make them able to survive and thrive really, in a corporate environment. That's one thing. As regards to the innovation, I think that's another sort of angle to this issue. Whether those graduates that come out of our universities, whether they have been taught or whether they have learned how to innovate, whether they are open-minded, whether they are knowledgeable enough, whether they have enough resources, tools to innovate, to create, or are rather universities giving us people who are thinking in boxes and are not able to think outside boxes? And we're trying to build a smart nation. They are not capable of thinking creatively. Where do those sort of boxed people come from? Well, that's because of the way we teach people. We just ask them to memorize certain things and texts instead of teaching them skills and teaching them creative thinking. And I remember my own experiences, and I went to the university and then I went to the ACC, and the learning approaches, the teaching approaches were different, having also different learning outcomes as well. And it was a long time ago when I studied in the University of Latvia, whereas now I go to various courses and I specifically go there to learn new things, but the problem still persists. I mean, you understand what I mean. Our professors are not using contemporary methods, really. And let's give the floor to Mr. Eglitz because he will have to leave soon. I do really apologize that I will have to leave you because I've promised to attend a digitalization workshop which starts at 2:30, and I have to take the floor at 3 o'clock, and it is across on the other bank of the River Daugava. But I can't, keep my mouth shut. I mean, what we are facing today is the consequence of what we did or didn't do 20 or 25 years ago. The curricular reform, the school network consolidation, and the remuneration reform or teacher wage reform is something that has been happening only 1-2 years ago. That should have been addressed or solved 20, 25 years ago, and we would have different results today. And I've traveled around the globe and I've seen, advanced schools and how they operate and how they promote and foster innovation and innovative thinking amongst youngsters. And in this regard, what I'm hoping for, or what my expectation is, now we've changed the basis, skills learning. Now is being introduced. Let it, gain pace. We as policymakers will continue cooperating closely with Ministry of Education and Science, and we'll try to ensure that from the early school education, children are, among other things, being taught creative thinking and are being pushed towards vocational education and training. And we should promote, vocational education and training, professional education and professional skills, and also promote adult education when it comes to vocational education and training as well. To continue on education, we are approaching it from another side as well. Ministry of Economy is developing a new model, the ecosystem-based model, although this might be a limiting term in itself. Nevertheless, the idea is that we are trying to bring industry leaders together with startups, scholars, researchers, and multinationals. So we are trying to create an innovation ecosystem. We're not self-sufficient. I mean, we need to draft this knowledge from abroad as well. We need to have access on multinationals involved in order to get our companies also on international global supply chains or value chains as well. And we are also getting the scholars or researchers involved in that, and we have succeeded when it comes to material sciences together with Solid State Physics Institute and a number of companies that, are in this cluster like Glass and others. We have started a similar initiative also in the bioeconomy sector as well. So I would like to hope that this will materialize into something. Thank you, Mr. Egli. Let's go back to the governance of the universities and how does that sort of link up? And what can businesses or investors rather can do, and scholars and academics can do in order to improve the governance, and politicians as well? Well, let me get back to the quality of those professors in the context of the governance. Finally, politicians have agreed that the international criteria like governance of the university is something that we should focus on. Until now, universities said, international standards, that's not really applicable to us. We're so unique, we're so specific, and we'll, deal with everything ourselves. Now, finally, science and the quality of science is the basic criteria for evaluating or assessing university from international competitors' point of view. I'm very happy about the discussion that we've been having for the past 6 months, because it really puts things into perspective. Just imagine a professor who has read something there, he quotes different books and says, I've read this and that, and compare it to a professor who's internationally experienced in the international circulation, having international articles, publications, and quotability is a lot of higher. And what he can teach to his students, that's a great and immense difference, and this is what also contributes to international competitors of the university. Just, think what the professor can do. He's working with bachelors, that he's working with masters, and then there's, graduates and postgraduates as well, or the doctoral students who will then have dual training with the industry, who will be able to process the information quickly and create new knowledge. And this is not only what the science needs, but also what the economy needs. We need those PhDs working for the companies. Let us, twist it a little bit. We heard about the kindergartens, about preschool, school level. We heard about the importance of teachers, their quality and knowledge, and so on and so forth. And then, people who are being educated and becoming the labor pool for the universities. You as academics and politicians, what should we do, or what would you suggest to the companies who need those workers? How can they work with politicians, and maybe they can, help change the governance of the universities in order to have better quality labor? So what are the sort of what's the follow-up? What are the next steps for the companies? How should companies reach out to the businesses in order to have the proper labor? Because there's a scarcity of labor. Well, I again, as an academic, of course, would like to bring the perspective from the university. Of course, student will not be innovative if his professor is not innovative. If we think that the professor and doctoral studies are just, trying to get rid of any influences, I mean, just, give me my niche and let me and just get off of my back. As soon as we get off that sort of mindset, we'll have a lot of improvements, because otherwise it will not be able to attract creative or talented minds. And what we see, in the Senate of University of Latvia, we have demands for the transparency, decentralization of the power, more openness, and those are natural sort of democratic processes. And if we would have, at the macro level, universities being responsible for the same sort of scientific goals and on quotability goals that are already operational on the lower levels, then we'll have a great improvement. And looking at other universities, professors are very much aware of not reaching those goals. They know how quotability will sort of apply to how much they earn, how much they attract, and so on and so forth. And we can put all those things in place, and if the management will be interested in getting active professors working for them, then, people like monkey see, monkey do. The students, the way they've been taught, they will behave afterwards. So it's very important to make sure that those trained monkeys that are in the universities are the best role models, and businesses should suggest what those role models should be. So come to us, tell them what they should research topics, and tell them what kind of expectations you have when it comes to STEM. We don't know, for example, what modern ports are doing, what they need, what are the logistics challenges, contemporary challenges. That's an interesting world, and that's a very profitable world, and students might be interested in that. The message that we need to get across that you can achieve a lot by hard work, and we have to make sure that we are constantly making a pressure on those professors to make sure they are active. Let me also underline that we are talking about a sort of a garden. You can't just plant an apple tree and just expect to have 2 tons of apples next year. It takes time for those apples and for that apple tree to grow. But what we can do is try to introduce flexible learning approaches, like, for example, further education in order to have modern, knowledgeable teachers. The Ministry of Education and Science has agreed that anybody with any kind of diploma can join this or enroll this one-year program, then can go teach in the school. That's a sort of a compromise. I think it's mission possible. I think that's the name of the initiative. That's a very interesting initiative, and we need similar examples of that kind. Just take, for example, Scandinavia. They have coding schools, smaller, bigger coding schools. Coding is very important nowadays, and a lot can be done. Also, when it comes to adult education, we have only 3 to 5% of people in the adult education. And for Scandinavia, look at Scandinavia, it's 15 to 20%, especially considering that only a third of our people are continuing their education. Madam Zashcherinska, from the business perspective, when you feel that you don't have particular professionals in your particular sector, do you go to universities? Do you reach out to higher education in general? Do you go to universities and say, in 3-4 years we'll need X number of those professionals or other professionals? Do you think that the system is flexible enough? Can you respond quickly enough? Well, let me structure my reply in sort of 2 parts. Well, it all boils down to what we do. There are businesses that are very active in reaching out to universities and making their demands known. So they have very smooth cooperation, which has led to development of specific study programs as well. And there are some businesses that are more passive, but when it comes to this issue, I think that we are good at passing the information on to universities and making our demands known and changing the curricula, and we know that the resources are out there, and we just need to push them a little bit. We just need to be more active. Another thing that we as businesses do, and I hope that we'll continue doing the same in future as well, is that we are trying to help the professors to shape to provide that content, and we are also actively lecturing in various universities in order to interact and to be in touch with what is happening in universities and what sort of students we have. We, as responsible sort of citizen, have to be involved in this and pass on our practical business knowledge to upcoming professionals as well, which would greatly benefit ourselves and our society on the whole as well. From my perspective, when it comes to education, I mean, I think that the biggest challenge is solving the challenges that we are facing currently with unorthodox approaches, or again thinking outside the box. I mean, everything's changing rapidly, and yesterday's solutions are no longer applicable today. So, are we capable of changing how we do things fast enough? Do we have enough? Do we have sufficient infrastructure to do so? Well, that's another question.
we have tried to get in touch with three universities. Only three are working with aviation field, and two private ones and one state one, and only the private one was responsive. The arguments that we heard were the following. The first and second course students would be the ones we would take. We offered to take them and to finance them so that in the third and the fourth year they could continue studying engineering sciences on a very high level, whether working at air companies or anywhere else, but there was no response. And what I see also that those foreign students were responsive, and I know that they won't stay here, they will leave. So I don't really want to train foreign students for leaving. Mr. Asheradens, I know that there is a plan that would somehow change the system of education, somehow would plant a new apple tree or replant the ex-growing one on another site. Some time ago you were speaking about the plan of the Ministry of Education and Science to change the plan. The whole system which is training our research and then also professionals. Perhaps you could outline the plan so that those present would understand what is being done and what is being planned for. Well, I believe that this whole process is in its initial stage and rather fragmented. I'm very thankful to FICIL that you were coming and really insisting on the need to change the governance model. You were negotiating with the parliament, and the ministry will make proposals in autumn. We have also succeeded in mobilizing 3 universities, Latvian Technical and Strategic University. They are developing roadmap, top 500 roadmap, how to get into those top global ratings. And the first offer, the first proposal is very good, and we will discuss it with the Prime Minister and see how to put this on the political agenda. Another point, another initiative that comes from young researchers, this is our moral obligation not to lose those who have graduated abroad, who have good international education. They have come to us with initiative how to produce a targeted support program for research. And the final one, we have agreed with the Ministry of Education that a working group will be established at the Parliament. I hope we do that at the beginning of the summer, and we need a discussion on merging the science law and the education law. It's not only to put in mechanically 2 documents. We have to agree upon totally different aims for social development. And another matter, a parallel matter, which is quite important, are how to deal with the ICT sectoral deficit. We know the ICT. The Ministry of Economics, a program was set in 3,000 ICT specialists annually. We have taken the first step. I'm happy that many institutions of public administration, ministries, found resources, approximately 1 million, how to support this Buffalo program at the Technical University. And this core of the program has been established, and I believe that different actions will be taken how to improve the effectiveness and how to support students' access to this program. So we are dealing with the needs of one sector. Mr. Sauk, I will try to be very brief. I'm listening and I'm inspired by the discussion. I really want to get up and go and become involved in all this that you have been discussing. And I'm actually trying to do it, as many people present here. However, if we are talking now here about a garden, then and trees, we have to speak also about a gardener. A plan, that is nice. It's nice to have a plan. But probably we should talk more about those who will implement all those wonderful things mentioned by Mr. Asheradens and that we have been discussing here. Why am I slightly anxious about this? For 5 years, our council has been preparing FICIL Sentiment Index. And 5 years ago, we were discussing with the same enthusiasm and offering the same beautiful solutions, all these problems. What should be done in higher education? And it all was wonderful, and it looked so hopeful. And each time you had the feeling, we are going to get it. This is the moment. I'm just afraid that unless all these things that mentioned by Mr. Eglitis are resolved, and I'm not talking on the level of ministers and state secretaries, they are capable people, but on the level of implementation mechanisms, then perhaps I'm afraid that in 5 years' time, we will be discussing all this again. And as FICIL, we will be reminding you of all of this. Well, FICIL is in a way both outsider and insider. Who should come with a basic initiative? Who should be the major force in changing the system? Also, so that the University of Latvia and other universities would understand. We just talked to the Council of Higher Education, Mr. Vatra. He said that all these changes were very interesting and deserved support. But perhaps you can. But really, where this core initiative should come from? Of course, people from the outside can tell all this, and people will know. But well, I know that it's easier said than done. But I believe that any reform in education or healthcare or science, and we could go on with it, any reform should be started by reform in public administration, so that the reform would be implemented by wiser people. That would make reform more productive. And then specific features of the sector. For example, I believe Mr. Koshcheyos knows that in education we have so many competing parties, and I believe that the resources are squandered through this competition. And if the policymakers themselves were more innovative and capable, not on the level of governance, but on the level of implementation, that would be fine. Otherwise, what happens? We buy and we spend 300,000 for some kind of recommendations and proposals, and then we have to take a look at what's been done with those expensive and good recommendations. I have a very brief comment. I believe I'm an optimist compared to Arnis. And I have, for those 4 to 5 years in those discussions with colleagues from FICIL, I'm beginning to see that we are getting the critical mass in some kind, and perhaps we see a new and more contemporary role. We see more and more support coming from all parties. People are supporting the reform. What we are missing, I wouldn't really be speaking here so much about public administration. I believe that we lack and we are missing society's support, and especially students' support. Well, if the students in general would demand better quality and higher quality, that would really be the solution. Really, we lack this part. Yeah, but also the students pay their study fees. I don't want to comment on this, but if the students were supporting the reform in general, if they were supporting our initiatives to a larger extent, I would believe we would be proceeding at a much faster rate. I believe our coffee break is suspiciously close, and if you have any comment or if you want to sum up our discussion, and the very last comment or question, Andris Kraus, Baltic Corporate Governance Institute. I was really happy to to hear about this positive dynamics. And this, I would like to compare this to a boat. We are all in the same boat. It is swaying slightly. And now you have the feeling that we are starting to row, all of us, into the right direction, all of us, but we still have many who are imitating this action, and they are trying to capsize, to overturn the boat. But I believe that this change of the governance model is really an absolute necessity. And we should teach about the governance of companies, about councils and board members, but also all these people from the private sector could provide advice to university, to governance, to help them get out of the vicious circle where they are too self-sufficient. And I hope that perhaps this boat will start moving faster and faster, and perhaps I hope that in autumn we might be discussing a concrete model of university governance. Any final comments? Well, I can only say the following: God let us know what we are doing, and let us do what we know. About this metaphor of boats, that's called coherence. It's just a law of physics. 2 + 2 could be more than 4 if we really are moving into one direction. We have this resulting force. Mr. Asher Adens. Well, about coherence. First of all, fundamental changes in the system of education have begun, and I'm happy that a large number of people are involved in creating the new curricula, and that the teachers are discussing and fighting. And of course, the situation is very complicated. We have 28,000 teachers involved. And there are people, I do apologize, who are old and tired and exhausted. Everything is up to their neck. They don't want anything. And there are young and specialists with enthusiasm. We also see major change in this transition to the official language Latvian as a language of instruction. Actually, this will make us ready for immigration. This was still the missing chain link. And also many schools are talking about how to take in those people who come back from immigration, who have been in Ireland, the United Kingdom, and schools, and kids return back to Latvia. And the schools have to accommodate them. What I see in the sector of higher education, we see huge demand in society. It's not just we 3 experts have discussed it and that's it. Young scientists are coming and saying that they are not ready to tolerate the system. Actually, I like this crisis in the university, because the crisis is always the beginning of great change, major change. And I've heard in our committee, we've heard many interesting discussions. I personally know also young researchers who have become involved in this movement, and they are ready to express their position. And now, Zlata, is a final comment. Actually, I also really liked what I heard today, and also recommendations coming from FICIL, that these recommendations just are not left standing. And I believe that this is our collective force and the force of our collective thinking. In our council, we unite different interests and different expertise. From the perspective of a company, of course, I understand that all businessmen are very impatient. So we have to think also about short-term solutions, especially in the field of demographics and, well, education. Of course, we understand that these are long-term changes, and yet those changes have to take place. We cannot just go on waiting for them eternally. That's the position of the companies, to see the change and to believe that the changes will happen also in the future. Well, I would like to thank the participants of this panel. Eriks Eglītis, Arvilas Atšarādens, Vjačeslavs Haščejevs, Zlata Elksniņa Zaščarinkas. Thank you for being with us, and also thank you all those who followed us online. Hopefully many did that, because we believe that it's very important to have the public support and also student support. Now we have half an hour for the coffee break. And very briefly, what's going to follow? After the coffee break, we continue a conversation on the topic. Tomorrow is a consequence of now. We invite very kindly all of you present here and also those following us online to follow the panel on the major infrastructure project in the Baltics Rail Baltica, which will be moderated by Baiba Rubesa, and we will have highest level participants from the sectors of transport, rail and aviation. And thank you for this discussion.
Es ceru. Pirmo reizi šāda diskusija īstenībā. Tieši tā, ne, nu, aizkadros un ēteros, jā, bet autori, jā, es līdz šim nepraktizēju.
Ļoti profesionāli.
Mācos
Tiešām.
šobrīd, jā.
Ir baigi labi.
Man nav jausmas, kā no malas izskatās. Paldies.